So let me start by introducing Ibu Rhita Simorangkir. She's a postdoc in Environmental Institute, Economic Institute in the Czech Academy. Yeah, well, but also a researcher in the Charles University. And I think I'll give you the floor.
Thank you, Vanessa. My name is Rhita Simorangkir, and it's good to be back because I used to work here at LPEM, so it feels like a nostalgia to me. So, so I am also at Economic Institute of Czech Academy of Sciences and researcher at Sergey at Charles University. So today I'm going to discuss one of my working papers with my co-author called Rona at Johns Hopkins. It's about how poverty alleviation in the case of Indonesia can be an effective conservation strategy. So from the title, you can see that this is an unintended consequences because this is a poverty alleviation program, so dedicated to alleviate poverty, not necessarily to alleviate deforestation. But later on, I will give you some facts and some method that I use to generate the conclusion that I have. Okay, next. Okay, so this is like two pictures. The first, the top one, represents, if you look at the left side, this is still a green area in Rhona in western Brazil in 1973. And then on the left side is actually 20 years later in Rhona. You can see that this is a land use change. So before it is like forest, covered by forest. And then later on, it's become a land use, right? So it's no longer a forest. Okay, I think I'm going to talk a bit louder and not using the microphone. And then on the bottom panel, this is a picture of poverty in Papua, in Indonesia. So this is two big challenges that the world in the 21st century face. We deal with land conversion and then also poverty. I'll do that. And here is the map of distribution of tropical rainforests all over the world. Sorry, it's not. Yeah, here it is. So this is the distribution of tropical rainforest countries all over the world. If you can see, most of the tropical rainforests, since it's tropical, of course they're in the equator, right? So but later on you will see not only that this is in the equator, but these countries in the equators are still developing countries. So if we plot the GDP per capita in 2010 for these top 20 countries with the most forest cover in the world, here, for example, here is Brazil. Can you large it?
Yeah, sekat. Bisa di. I think it's this thing. Bener kan ya? Pada nggak bisa ngelihat dengan baik. Tapi kalau suara oke?
Juga. Oke, lampunya juga berlalu ya. Yang paling pojok boleh kita potong. Ada lebih baik. Yeah, is that good? Yeah, turn this on. Or what? Ya, cobain sebentar yang di sini. Punya. Yep. Okay, the first one is Brazil, which is a country with the most tropical rainforest in the world. And then the second one is Congo, but this bar represents their GDP per capita. And what I want to show you from this figure is this GDP per capita of these 20 countries with the most forest cover is very low below the OECD average. So the orange bar, orange line that you find on the top is the OECD average. So we can say that these top 20 countries are still low until middle income countries. Right, so what we found from the graph before, distribution of tropical rainforests and also the GDP per capita, shows that there's some correlation. But all economic students will chant correlation is not causation, right? So here, there is some evidence in the case of how forest conservation programs can achieve their goals without exacerbating poverty. So whether conservation such as protected areas, payment for ecosystem services can reach their goal, which is increasing or at least decreasing deforestation. whether this goal can be achieved without exacerbating poverty. And the evidence is there. They don't exacerbate poverty, but models. So for example, Anda and then country Rhita in Bolivia and Kajian in Uganda shows that this payment for ecosystem services not only reducing deforestation, but also improving their economic activity. So however, if we look at the national level, put yourself on the point of government. So at the government level, when we see their expenditure, then we will see their priorities, right? So the expenditure on environmental programs in low and middle income countries are dwarfed by expenditures on anti-poverty programs. It's not necessarily that they should be equal or not, but this is just a fact, right? So I pointed out here in Brazil, for example, the share of poverty alleviation programs to total government expenditure is 3.6%. But for environmental management, this is Brazil, the country that used to be the most active in conservation policy. It's only 0.8%. And in Indonesia, for example, the poverty alleviation share of government expenditure is 6.3% in 2012. And the share for environmental management is only 0.9%. So you can see that this expenditure is very small for environmental management. And we want to see whether there are unintended consequences of whether this poverty alleviation program have unintended consequences to environmental protection.
Rhita, sorry, can you slow down a bit?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Yes. Okay. So this figure shows us the countries in 1997 that implemented the first conditional cash transfers in the world. So we have Mexico here, and then Brazil and Bangladesh. But from the success story of Mexico, conditional cash transfers in Mexico, in 2017, only 20 years after the first implementation of conditional cash transfers, almost 50 countries in the world implemented some kind of conditional cash transfers. And of course here, Indonesia is one of them, right? Since 2007, we have household and community level conditional cash transfers. So how can we learn from previous studies? Can we actually learn something so we don't necessarily do some more research? Well, there are studies that try to see what is this relation between poverty alleviation programs or income to environmental outcomes. However, these case study narratives usually use weak designs for causal inference because, as I mentioned earlier, correlation is not causation. And then the second, use broad indicators of economic growth or development. And the third one is fail to isolate the policy or economic mechanism through which poverty changes. So they usually only use GDP per capita and environmental changes. While what policymakers need is what particular program that have unintended consequences to the environment. Because we want to learn better, it's not just broad indicators. So one study came close to share this slide, which is the study by Jennifer Alex Garcia and others and Lisa. So they're trying to see from the Mexican conditional cash transfers, the most successful one, the one that makes all of these countries follow conditional cash transfers. And they see whether these conditional cash transfers have unintended consequences to the deforestation in Mexico. And Mexico is one of the top 20 countries with the most forest cover. So what they found is they use regression discontinuity design. So they found in the local average treatment effect that localidades, or maybe in Indonesia we call it like village, that receive this program actually experiencing higher deforestation. So they compare villages with the conditional cash transfers and villages without conditional cash transfers only around the discontinuity area, and they found that those who receive the conditional cash transfers experiencing more deforestation. Okay, but there is some weaknesses about this study because they only look at the local average treatment effect. So the sample is very much restricted, and we cannot see heterogeneity in the sample. So what this study is contributing is we are estimating the effect of poverty alleviation program on deforestation using Indonesia's CCT program, which is program Keluarga Harapan, and we use plausibly exogenous variation of increase in income through these conditional cash transfers. And we focus on large proportion of the affected population. So rather than focusing on local average treatment effect, we actually focus on average treatment effect on the treatment, ATP. And program Keluarga Harapan, a little bit of program Keluarga Harapan, it is a household conditional cash transfer program that started in 2007 as a pilot randomized program. But this pilot randomized program was implemented in non-forested area in Indonesia. So we didn't use this pilot program. We used the rollout program from PKH. So this is the obligations of and eligibility of program Keluarga Harapan. So eligible households, who are these eligible households? Households with income in the 8th percentile lowest national income distribution of Indonesia. And if they have pregnant mothers or babies or toddlers or school kids, they are the eligible households for program Keluarga Harapan. And given this condition, given this eligibility, they have to fulfill some health and education obligations. As you can see here, for example, pregnant mothers have to do prenatal care visit and postnatal care visit, while for school kids, they have to enroll in school or minimum attendance of 85% of school needs. Right, so you might ask me how these conditional cash transfers could affect deforestation. Okay, maybe I will just plug in some variables and say unintended consequences, but it's not a research if it's like that, right? So we need to have a conceptual thinking. So why these conditional cash transfers can affect deforestation? So we conceptualize there can be from two channels. The cash transfer itself, the cash transfers you get money, your income increase, it's an income shock to your budget relax, then you can make a decisions more in the capital over investment, consumption, and consumption living. At the end, it will actually affect deforestation. And based on the conditionalities, it could be from their education, or health, or the scrutiny aspects. So because they have to enroll their kids to school, for example, now they lost labor in their agricultural products. So that will actually affect deforestation, right? Because they now have limited amount of resources. So that is the conceptual thinking for this how conditional cash transfers could actually affect deforestation. Okay, so let's get to the point of how am I going to estimating this conditional cash transfers effect on deforestation. So the causal effect of this PKH on deforestation on PKH villages will be the difference between the expected outcome of the villages that receive the PKH and the expected outcome of villages that did not receive the PKH, given that PKH given that as if they received a PKH, right? So, however, we cannot find this unobservable counterfactual condition, correct? Because it's either this village receive it or not. We cannot observe receive as if they receive. So how do we do about that? Go next. Right. So we actually control for time variant community characteristics and time invariant community characteristics. So what we assume here is if we control for their fixed effects and also the time invariant community characteristics, then all of the other variables that affecting how these villages receive PKH is random. And we can say that the effect of this PKH to deforestation is from the difference between villages that receive and villages that did not receive this PKH. Okay, so now I'm going to explain how PKH is rolled from national government to the village level. So the unit of the analysis is village level, so desa. From the national government, they choose the province. So national government, Kementerian Sosial or TNP2K, they chose the provinces, several provinces in Indonesia. We don't know how they select the provinces. However, from several provinces, they choose districts that in the 80th percentile of income distribution, and they offer to the districts whether they want to take this PKH or not. From the districts, they choose sub-districts that have some supply side readiness. Well, what is supply side readiness? Because this is conditional cash transfers on education and health, they at least have the facilities for health and facilities for education. So that is the supply side readiness. And some other characteristics, which is the households, poor households in the sub-districts. Because the conditional cash transfers is targeted to the poor households, they have to have poor households in the sub-districts, right? So there you go, we got into the sub-districts. But our unit of analysis is at the village level. So how at the village level they receive PKH or not is based on the number of eligible households in that villages. Okay? So to summarize, exposure to PKH at the village level is largely a function of fixed time-invariant characteristics and observable time-varying characteristics. And we can control that. Of course, from econometrics methods, we can control that. And we actually utilize the staggered rollout and panel data to estimate the causal impact of PKH. Right, so this is an overview of the data that I use. So I use the satellite mapping data for forest cover and forest cover loss from Matthew Hansen, that is published in Science in 2013. So I use 2000 until 2012, and I have the polygons of village level from Statistics Indonesia in 2013. So the resulting data sets is forest cover and forest cover loss from 2001 until 2012 for each villages in Indonesia. And then PKH villages, I received the data for PKH villages from Bappenas in 2014. And this is the indicator that we are interested in, whether they got the treatment or not. And then I also use control, which is time-invariant characteristics, which are average temperature and average precipitation. I use NISA data for this time-varying characteristics. Is there any question? Is it still too fast? Yes. Okay, so here is the stylized fact of how I'm going to propose my design later on. So if you see here, this is the blue line indicates the early cohort of PKH, those villages that received PKH in 2008 until 2010. I don't use the PKH villages in 2007 because it's a randomized pilot PKH, which is in non-forested areas in Indonesia. So blue dash line again indicates those villages that have that received this PKH in 2008, 2009, and 2010. And orange dotted line, so this orange line, indicates the forest cover of villages who received PKH in the later year, which is 2011 until 2012. So what I want to show you here in this figure is they have overlapping confidence interval, which means that they are not that different. The forest cover loss in the early cohort is not that different than forest cover loss in the late cohort. This is in pre-treatment periods, in 2001 until 2007. So this figure wants to show you that PKH villages in early and late cohort is basically similar. Okay? Right, so based on this stylized fact, we can use the fixed effect panel design to actually estimate the causal impact of PKH on deforestation. So my outcome variable is forest cover loss. So why is forest cover loss? And my variable of interest is PKH IP, which is whether this village I receive PKH at year P. Okay? And XIP is time variant characteristics, which are temperature and precipitation. And I also stick in fixed effect characteristics there, alpha I. Gamma T is the year dummies to capture all macroeconomic effects, and then random error term EIP. Right? It's a simple design because we know that this from the stylized facts, these villages are the same in terms of forest cover loss from 2001 until 2007. Since the assignment of this PKH is not at the village level, which is our unit of analysis, but at the sub-district level, we cluster our standard error at the sub-district level. Is that clear? I want these specifications to submerge in your mind because this is going to be important later on. Okay, next. Okay, so what do we find, right? So we use that specification, we control for time invariant characteristics, and we show you that they are at the baseline, they are the same in terms of forest cover loss. So what we found is there is 28% reduction for those villages who receive PKH late compared to late cohort. Right, so there is 28% reductions. Here, this 28% reduction is similar to 5.2 hectares. So within a village, which is on average village level in our sample area is about 49 square kilometers, there is a decrease in deforestation for 5 hectares per year for the treated villages. Right? So here, the number of cluster here is 523, so it's a big cluster, so it's not by error. Next, so the next question that we want to ask, of course, okay, so maybe there is some heterogeneity because some villages receive it early and some other villages receive it later, right? So the exposure to this PKH is different for one villages to the other villages. So what if we actually separate it? So that's what I did in this figure. So for those villages who have exposure to the PKH less than 2 years, they have 27% reduction, which is similar to our main estimate, right? And those villages who actually got it longer actually experience more reducing deforestation. So again, it's more reduction in deforestation, so it's good. So deforestation reduced more. I know it's kind of complicated, reduced more. But here, to make it easier, I put it like from the 0 bar and then 0 line and then it goes down. So you can see here, this is only a reduction for 5 hectares, while here is almost 15 hectares per year for those villages who got treated early compared to later. So, okay, so now we want to test for heterogeneity, right? Because it might be that this effect is actually a mass of other effects. So we want to know whether there is heterogeneity in treatment effects. So basically the result is there is no overall pattern. So what I did is I tried to interact the PKH dummies with eligible households in the sub-districts and then the poor identification characteristics, and still there is no difference. So there is no heterogeneity in the treatment effect. Right, so now it's the fun thing, right? Do you believe that results, there is a 28% reduction? No? No? So let's assess it, whether this is robust to any specifications, right? Okay, the first one is inadequate control for time invariant confounders, right? So we control for time invariant confounders, which is the fixed effect. But how about time invariant confounders? I only control for precipitation and temperature. So what if I miss one time variant variables in the specification? My estimate could be biased, right? So what I did is I do a falsification test and matching based panel data design. I will discuss it later on the results. And then the second one, the threat to the identification, is a barrier to control for a time varying confounder, right? So I use this for lag dependent variable design to test whether the specification is robust to time varying confounder. And then the third one is a broader set of unobserved time-varying village level confounding variables. So I use, based on the paper by, later on it's developed by Oscar, but previously it's by Alfonji. So basically he plugged in one other variable that is correlated to the observable variables that we have and see whether this extension of one other variable could actually make the effects that we found earlier disappear. Okay, so the first one is the fun one, is the falsification test. So PKH impact should only be detectable if PKH arrives in the village, not before, right? So I falsely indicate the villages that receive it from 2008 until 2012, but I actually moved this indicator to 2003 until 2007. So if I found an effect in this period that supposedly they don't have the indicator, then I might actually detect something wrong. It's not the effect of the PKH, but actually something embedded in the village itself, right? So that's basically what I did, and can you? Right, okay, before. Okay, I think for easier presentations, the second one that I did to do a falsification test is to do matching-based panel data design. So what I did is I collect all of the villages that get treated early, and then all villages that get treated late. And I match this group of treated villages, early to late cohort. So this is the result. We found a negative effect, but if you see the confidence interval is so large, right? So basically we don't find any effect if we falsely identify this PKH in the pre-treatment period. So what I found in the treatment period might be as well the effect of the PKH itself, not something else in the villages, right? So the second one is the matching base. So what if I match those early cohort villages to late cohort villages? What we found is 34% reductions in deforestation. So it is consistent to what we found earlier. It's 28% reduction, and the difference is not that different, right? It's about more than 5 hectares. So that is the results of assessing the rivalry explanation. So it is the effect of PKH. Still not convinced? Let's do another check. Right, so this is the lag-dependent variable design. So the first track is time variant characteristics that I failed to control. This is time variation characteristics that I might not be able to control. So what I did is using lag-dependent variable design and plug in the outcome of the villages in the previous period as one of my control variables. So what it did is, if this there is some lag-dependent variables that is not captured in my specification, it will be captured here. And what we found here is 30% reduction, which is still similar to what we found earlier, 28% reduction. In terms of hectares, it's not that different. So if you see in the mostly harmless econometrics, they use this lag-dependent variable design and see whether this is in contrast to fixed effect design. And if they are not that different, that we can selflessly say that the result is robust. Okay, the last one is the sensitivity test using the method developed by Oster, which is previously method that is developed by Albonji. So now I want to see whether this fact that I found is sensitive to hidden bias. So what I found here is if I try to use all of the variations, which is 1.3 times r squared in my specification, then I will find if there is some missing variable, I will find still a 14% reduction. So this will be the lower bound of my estimate. So if there is some variable that I fail to control, what if this variable is included? Then this variable will reduce my treatment effect, but still I will find it in the negative. It's still reducing my, reducing deforestation. Right, so this is a little bit of cost-benefit analysis. So I'm not going to go deeper into this, but what we found is right. So if you read the Jayachandran paper in Science, they compare the cost of providing payment for ecosystem services with the benefit, which is the CO2 that is reduced by reducing deforestation. So here we mimic that method, and what we found here is if this deforestation from PKH will will be permanently there, so it will permanently reduce this deforestation, then the benefit cost ratio is about 9.9. However, if we think that after 2 years, because this is still a land, right? So in every year, every farmers has this decision whether they want to cut down the forest or not. So if, for example, they can at least delay deforestation for 2 years, then the benefit cost analysis would be 0.3. But this is still good because PKH itself is not dedicated to reducing deforestation, right? So we use the cost of PKH with the benefit in terms of environment, not really benefit for PKH itself in terms of increase in prenatal care or education attainment. Right, so now maybe you want to know about a little bit of the spillovers, whether there is some spillovers for PKH villages to those non-PKH villages. So I use all of the entire PKH villages that never participated in the program, and I indicate whether they have a neighbor that receives PKH or not. So, So the conclusion is there is no evidence of spillover. So whether I regress this non-treated villages as a treated villages, if they have a neighbor that is a treated villages, turns out they don't have any effect on the deforestation. Right, so now you want to talk about first what is the mechanism. Okay, I already showed you that this reducing deforestation by 28%. I already assessed the robustness of the results to threats of specifications. But you might want to ask what is the potential mechanism, how this conditional cash transfers actually reducing deforestation. So the first one is through health and education conditionalities. However, the evaluation of the PKH itself to the non-forested area shows that there is no increase in education, and also not in terms of health outcomes, longer health outcomes. So it seems like this is not the potential channels of PKH to affect deforestation. And then the second one is if this actually affecting CCT, affecting deforestation through capital and labor investments. Turns out that there is no significant difference of working hours between those who receive and did not receive PKH. And then how about consumptions? So beef consumption or high protein consumption food is actually increasing with receipt of PKH. However, since beef consumption in Indonesia itself is not followed by supply of cow in Indonesia, so we don't have big pastures, which is the characteristics of deforestation in Latin American countries. It seems like this potential channel seems to be not working as well. The potential channels that we are thinking is actually consumption smoothing, and then the second one is reciprocity. What do we mean by consumption smoothing here is that households, given that now they receive PKH on a quarterly basis, they can smooth their consumptions. So when we ask them, I did a field survey but it's not a representative, so only 32 rural field survey. When we ask them what do they did in the forest, they use forest more like an insurance. So insurance again, bad shocks. So it seems like this PKH act as this replacement of insurance, because for the very poor it's very hard to get insurance and credit as well. So forests for them act as this credit replacement or insurance. So when they receive these conditional cash transfers on a quarterly basis, they don't need to go to the forest anymore, or they still go to the forest but deforest less, because it needs a lot of labor hours to actually deforest. And the next one is reciprocity. I haven't been able to put the results here, but the summary for the results, we actually test for voting, whether districts who have more villages that get PKH have more probability to actually get re-elected. The head of the districts get re-elected. And what we found is, even though it's a weak evidence, it does true. So for a districts that have more PKH villages, the head of the districts get higher probability to get elected. Okay, and that's all. And a comparison with one of the leading literature about conditional cash transfer and deforestation, they found that increasing deforestation, what we found is actually decreasing deforestation. So what might be the difference? The first one is connection among higher incomes, beef consumption, and pasture grazing on great forests. So as I mentioned, in Latin American countries, deforestation drivers are usually because of pastures. So increase in the consumption of protein, which is beef, actually increasing the supply of the cow itself. So it might, and from that paper, that's their potential hypothesis. And then the second one is because they only measure it on the local average treatment effect, so only around the discontinuity. And then they also only use imprecise unit of analysis. What I use is actually the village level polygons from the BPS, so it's actual boundaries of villages. Since they don't have the actual boundaries of localidades, they only have the point of localidades, they just use PSN polygons to measure the comparisons. Okay, thank you. If you have a question.
Maybe a bit of confirmation while it's still in your mind, if you want to ask, and then we reserve the second presentation to the discussion. Any confirmation questions? No? Shall we go on to the next presenter? So, Rona, your floor. Rona is a researcher in the WRI. She is affiliated with the Low Carbon Development Program and New Climate Economy. Your floor.
Thank you everyone for coming to today's presentation, and thank you for sparing time to be with us today. Before we start, I would like to introduce myself.
And sparing your time to be with us and discuss about several of our research. My name is Rona, Rhita, and I'm from WRI. Today I'm going to explain about our current research on costs and supply curve for peat conservation and restoration. In this research, I'm working with Dr. Sonny Mumbunan. He's also a senior economist and researcher in research associate in WRI. He's also working as a researcher in RCCC UI. And for me myself, I'm previously studying in the Netherlands and currently I'm working in WRI. For today's presentation, I'm going to explain about the overview of my research.
Maybe speak louder. I'm going to explain about the overview of our research today. Firstly, we are going to explain about the peatland context and why it's significant in our research, what methodology and data that we're using, the programs and interventions that we got from the methodology that we use, and lastly, the results, which is the cost and the supply curve for this research. But if anyone if no one cannot hear me correctly, just raise hand so I can speak louder. First of all, as you can see in here, you can see the Indonesian map, which I'm creating myself for the peat-rich island in Indonesia. But before I'm going to the peatland context in Indonesia, I'm going to talk about the global context for the peatland itself. Peat itself has higher carbon content for like 10 times higher than the mineral soils. So it's actually save up carbon in the world. So it's really significant as a carbon storage or carbon sink in the world. For the global itself, it's actually save up to 550 gigaton of carbon, which is 36% is located in tropical peatland, and one of them is Indonesia. Indonesia itself comprise and Indonesia save up to 11 until 14% of tropical peatland, which is around 31 gigaton in Indonesia itself. And in the map in here, I'm only showing you around 75.6 coverage peat-rich province and islands in Indonesia, including Sumatra, Kalimantan, and Papua. I'm going to explain later on why I'm plotting this map, because we're going to have 6 variations later on. But for the peatland context in Indonesia, we see that one of the biggest emission in Indonesia actually comes from peatland itself. Why come from peatland? Because since peatland is a carbon storage or carbon sink for the carbon itself, when its condition is disturbed, when the intensity of land clearing is higher, then they start to get rid of the peat itself to make farming or to create other practices. And when peat is actually disturbed, the carbon dioxide will be released to the atmosphere, and when it's dry, it will lead to higher fire potential. So in Indonesia itself, the fire incident, the biggest one is actually in 1997 and in 2015. In 1997, the fire that happened in peatlands released around 0.81 until around 2.6 gigaton, which is comprising of around 40% of the annual carbon emission from fossil fuel in European. And in 2015, 1/3 of Indonesian emission actually comes from peatland itself. So to make a clear statement, Indonesia actually, peatland Indonesia is actually facing critical condition where most of our emission actually comes from the peatland itself. Mostly around 40% of the emission comes from peatland itself. The objective of our research is actually to assess suitable interventions. Why actually we do this research is because since policymaker is currently working towards more sustainable development, especially towards peatland development. So we're trying here to create or assess what kind of possibility or identify interventions that's going to work out to save peat, either from conservation or from restoration. So we're here to indicate what kind of possible options to help the decision maker, and also to indicate the intervention itself in terms of the cost and abatement potential. We use 3 steps of methodology. The first methodology is that previously, last year, we created some peat workshop. It's for the stakeholders that are related to peat development. We invited from the stakeholder from the public, private, and NGO society to get together and to think what kind of interventions that are possible to be implemented in the peatland itself. For example, for conservation or restoration. And here we introduce approval voting. For those of you who doesn't know, approval voting is for multi-candidate election. So we propose several interventions that are suitable for Indonesian peatland. And from there, we're going to rank which intervention are the most suitable that should be implemented in Indonesia. And together with the stakeholders, we identify these programs, and later on, we're working on identifying the interventions underneath the programs that I will show you later, that we actually validate with the experts. The second step, that from those interventions, we will calculate the emission abatement and also the cost to implement this list of interventions in Indonesian peatland. And so we can create the marginal cost curve and also the supply curve from its aggregate level. This is the proposed programs that we received from the stakeholders. We got 21 programs, starting from peat fire until silver fishery. And from these 21 programs, we ranked them, and we take the top 15 as the suitability for the Indonesia. And afterwards, we see which from these 15 programs that are quantifiable.
why the N is only 176 when they all have 5 floating rates?
Because actually, some of them were,
Use the right.
didn't use it right, or they're going home first that time, or just like attending the workshop of the day or something. And from the programs, from the 15 program, we go down to like around 8 programs. And these 8 programs we identify furthermore until into the interventions. 3 to 5 interventions. For example, for the polyculture, we see like what kind of plants that are going to be suitable for the peatland, such as sagu, jelutung, kayu put, and light-headed.
Sorry, I don't know. Can you explain what is the interventions do with the peatland restoration?
For the peatland restorations, we're seeing these programs and we want to identify the detailed implementation for the polyculture, what kind of plant that we can actually plant or suitable for the peatland in Indonesia. Because peatland is actually really wet, like it has really high water content. So it has to be
the peatland that is already been burned, or
it's for both.
For both.
So we have like the degraded peatland and also the peat that hasn't been touched at all. So for the conservation, we're trying to, for example, give the peat fire prevention. For example, early warning system, just to make sure that there will be no fire or there will be no open land. I mean like land clearing. But for the restoration itself, because we will try to re-wet the peatland and we try to increase the water content, so we have to put the suitable plant that we will later on adapt to the peat conditions. Because we're actually, we can combine several interventions in the same area. But we're for sure make sure that the peatland won't be dry because it's not very natural. And it will release emissions. The formula itself, how can we calculate the abatement potential from each of the interventions that listed beforehand? We already searched from several scientific journals and papers, and we see that peatland emission actually comes from, it can be differentiated into 3 emission sources, which is burn biomass. Burn biomass is when the condition where plants above the peatland is burned. And second, peat decomposition is when the peat becomes really dry and it will expose to oxygen and it will release carbon dioxide later on. And lastly, peat fire, which is when peat has been decomposed and dry, then it will lead to, it will have higher fire potential. But mostly in Indonesia, it's a man-made fire because mostly they will open land for farming or something other activities. For burn biomass itself, we use the calculation area. In this case, I assume to be, I put it as 1 hectare because we want to compare between each intervention, so it will be easier if we can put the area as 1 hectare. And then quantity of emitted carbon is the carbon that is saved on the plants that is burned on the above peatland. When the above biomass is burned, then it will also release carbon. And times the burning efficiency, where I use several papers that we assume it has to be 1, the value, if a wildfire is occurred. Then the second equation is peat decomposition. 70% here means the percentage of carbon that is released from peat decomposition. And why is it 70%? Because 30% of the carbon released when it's decomposed actually comes from crude respirations. And 91 times that is actually, it represents linear relationship to peat decomposition. Lastly, for peat fire, we calculate bulk density, carbon content, times the area, which we assume 1 hectare, times the depth of the water level, and also times the depth of the fire that is consuming the peatland, times 3.67, which is the conversion of C to CO2. The bulk density and carbon content I will explain later. So the data that we're using is actually we use for the tree formula itself. for the depth, the area, the bulk density, and carbon content itself. But for bulk density and carbon content, we use the weighted average of all types of peatland in Indonesia from various depth, various density. So we calculate the weighted average, and specifically for the intervention, the primary canal intervention or canal blocking, we use the data from BRG or Badan Konservasi Gambut for the 2018 RTT or the planning for the canal blocking itself. And for the cost calculation on the implementation of each interventions, we have the input prices of labor costs and production costs. Labor cost in here is the minimum wage. We use the BPS data for the weighted average minimum wage with the 5 years range. And for production costs include materials, construction, maintenance, which we get from price index or IKK from 5 years, which will explain the price differences between 6 different provinces. The result itself is the cost and supply curve. Why do we use cost curve and supply curve? For this cost curve, we have the bottom-up approach, which is actually the approach that we use for this marginal abatement cost to create specific alternative scenarios, like which kind of interventions is suitable for the peatland, and we also included stakeholder within our previous 2 to 3 time big workshop with the stakeholders. And lastly, for the supply curve, we use the aggregate level of the marginal cost, in which we can see which intervention, what is the cost of each intervention to be implemented in peatland. You can see it from the economic side that is it worth it in terms of abatement costs, or in terms of abatement potential, or is it worth it because it's cheap but it has less impact. For the supply curve itself, we scale it to subnational. So in cost curve, we see it as a national level, while in supply curve, we see it in both ways, national and subnational, to see the island and province variation. That's why we use the on the island contextual level interventions, where each province has different kind of interventions depending on their suitability. This is the cost curve for Indonesia. I will explain to you bit by bit, slowly, because it might be a little intimidating because it's too complex to see. For the x-axis, actually the abatement potential, and the y-axis is the cost, or how much is the price to implement one intervention. When you can see from the abatement potential until this part, it's actually the cumulative abatement potential from all the interventions. So you can see each intervention here, you can see the block itself, but actually each block has 3 components, which is the emission source. As you can see, the burn biomass, peat decomposition, and peat fire. You can see it from here. Burn biomass is the lighter one, and then there's the only line, the black line is the peat decomposition, and this is the peat fire for example, Rhita. How can you actually read from this graph? When you see it, this is the cost level. As the intervention go to the left, it becomes cheaper. Like lower price compared to other intervention. When you go far to the right, it's the cost getting higher. As long as the intervention goes to the right, it will become more expensive than the previous intervention, as you can see. And how can you say which one has more impact? When you see, for example, the red country here, you can see that the block is bigger than compared to, for example, sago palm. I don't know if you can see it clearly here, but the bigger the block, it means it has higher abatement potential if you implement that interventions.
Your x-axis is the abatement potential, so it's not that on the right side is actually the highest abatement?
No. for the abatement potential, you can see it until here. It's around 26,000 ton carbon dioxide per hectare is the cumulative abatement potential. When you want to see like one intervention, how many the abatement potential, how much, then you have to calculate this part only. So from here to there is the cumulative abatement of 8 programs, which is around 34 interventions. But when you want to see one intervention, then you have to see only one block. I will differentiate between the 3 mentioned in the next slide. But if anyone still has, something in their mind, if it is still not clear or something, just raise your hand.
So how it has the largest abatement potential?
This one.
Yeah.
This is actually differentiated into 3 emissions, right? But when you compare Kakao to primary canal still has higher abatement potential compared to Kakao. So in here, the further right doesn't mean that it has higher abatement potential. It just means that it's the higher the block, it means it's more costly, but the wider the block means it has more potential to abate the carbon dioxide. So in this case, in Indonesia, the highest abatement will come from primary canal, and secondly, Wardhana.
Where is it?
Primary canal here, and Wardhana is here. So these 2 is the top intervention that may abate carbon dioxide the most compared to other interventions in here.
I think you should make a benefit cost ratio so it would be easier to see it, which one should be done first, no?
In here, actually,
think about it?
for the benefit, in here, we already think about it, but for the first stage, we're still counting the cost itself. So we haven't included any benefit from, for example, planting Jelutong or something, or other intervention. So that's why we couldn't see the cost benefit.
So how do you calculate the depth of the width
The
of
width.
right.
The width of the block is from the formula itself. So the abatement
the
potential,
benefit,
right?
right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the benefit for the abatement potential in
Yeah.
carbon dioxide,
Right.
not in cost as in money.
Right, but you can make it ratio so you will know which one to prioritize because in this case,
Yeah.
Right.
For that one, we haven't even gotten that part.
one denominator fix.
Yeah.
It will be easier. I think it's just
Yeah, for this we're using this MEC curve because we want to identify the interventions and we want to help the policymaker to see which one has more abatement potential and which one has less cost. But because usually they use the MEC curve first before we go into the other graph for policymaking decision. For the previous one that you have seen is the overall MEC curve for Indonesia with 3 different sources, and this one is differentiated into burn biomass and later on pit decomposition and pit fire. For the burn biomass itself, it can be seen that Ratmeranti and Sagu has the largest abatement potential compared to other interventions, while Kayu Putih, the furthest one there, has the highest cost to implement but less abatement potential. For pit decomposition, it can be seen that primary canal and secondary canal is top intervention here because it may be carbon dioxide higher than other interventions, while the rest is like from the vegetation programs, it is still costly in Indonesia and it's actually less relevant in Indonesia, but since it's come up from the stakeholders that we have to input it for now. And lastly, for pit fire, it's still somehow similar to pit decomposition previously, but it has higher range actually when you see the amount of carbon dioxide that will be abated. Actually, pit fire has higher abatement potential compared to the pit decomposition itself. if you apply the intervention. And the second result, which is the supply curve for Indonesia, is the aggregate level of the MAC curve before. As you can see, this is the cumulative between potential, where peak fire is actually 10 times higher. I mean, potential to be abated when you implement the interventions compared to pit decomposition and burn biomass. So when you implement one intervention, it will help reduce pit fire the most compared to pit decomposition and burn biomass. But the overall cost is almost more or less the same. When we differentiate it into 6 different provinces, for burn biomass, as you can see, they have similar abatement potential, but you can see that this blue line is actually Papua has the highest cost compared to other interventions, but they are more or less give the same abatement potential. While for pit decomposition, you can see that the curve is not close to each other. I mean, like it's further apart. Because we apply the island-only context, I mean like only island context interventions, where Papua we ignore the canal blocking because there is less canals compared to Sumatra and Kalimantan, so it's not really relevant to implement canal blocking in Papua. That's why it has less abatement, cumulative abatement until here, compared to Kalimantan Island and Sumatra Island. For Kalimantan itself has 50% less cost compared to Papua province, 2 of Papua's province, and 20% higher than Sumatra. For pit fires, it's more or less the same with burn biomass. It's similar, but it still can be seen that Papua is cost more than NDO is cost less, as you can see. The red one is because it's still preliminary results, we are open to any other discussion if you would like to ask, or if there's any confusing statement or something is not clear. But for our preliminary results, from our marginal cost curve, it can be seen that primary canal can be the #1 options for the decision maker to create policy. I mean, for example, Badan Konservasi Gambut has been doing that. I mean, like canal blocking in Sumatra and Kalimantan. And CO2 emission from pit fire has the highest potential to be reduced when you apply the interventions that we have chosen before. While pit decomposition is still less. And lastly, for supply curve, the pit fire has higher potential, which is 10 times higher than other burn biomass and pit decomposition to be abated. And intervention under pit decomposition suggests wider range of abatement potential compared to burn biomass and pit fire. And lastly, Papua has the highest cost when you have to implement the interventions compared to Rio. Thank you very much. If you have any questions.